The IRGC commander had been watching the same drone feed for 6 hours. 40 kilometers north of the Strait of Hormuz, deep inside a reinforced monitoring bunker carved into the coastal rock, he watched the feed with the kind of stillness that only comes from absolute certainty. He knew the Americans were coming. He had known for 11 days. Every radar signature, every satellite pass, every encrypted burst transmission that his signals teams had intercepted told the same story. Delta Force was going to hit the Bandar Abbas Missile Coordination Facility tonight, and he had built something beautiful for them. 3 layers of ambush, machine gun positions mapped to the exact breach points American doctrine demanded, red light flooding systems to destroy their night vision at the critical moment, an electronic warfare package that would shred their communications the instant they stepped inside. He had studied Delta Force the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He knew how they breathed. He had been preparing this trap for 4 months. He leaned back, looked at the feed, and permitted himself one moment of quiet satisfaction. Then, his radio operator turned around with an expression that made the satisfaction disappear instantly. "Sir, the facility at Bandar Abbas just went dark. All of it, at once." They were never going in there. This is the story of the operation the IRGC never saw coming because they were too busy watching the one that was never real. What happened over the Strait of Hormuz in the early hours of that morning was not a raid, it was not a rescue, it was not even a battle in any traditional sense. It was a magic trick performed at 30,000 feet by men whose names will never appear in any public record. And the most important thing they destroyed that night was not a building, not a radar system, not a missile battery. It was the 4 months of preparation that an enemy commander had invested in a trap that no one ever walked into. 11:14 the previous night, 48 hours before any of this began, a single operator attached to a classified compartment of the Intelligence Support Activity, a unit so deep inside the black budget that even most of the Pentagon doesn't know its exact mission, sat in a rented apartment in Muscat, Oman, and sent one message on a channel that routed through 7 different servers across 4 different countries before it disappeared. The message contained 11 words. The package is confirmed. Timeline is confirmed. He wants it exactly as planned. That message was a lie. It was a lie designed specifically for the Iranian signals intelligence team that had been intercepting that channel for 6 weeks, a channel the Americans had allowed them to intercept, had fed carefully, had used to build a picture of an operation that was detailed enough to be completely believable and entirely fictional. The Bandar Abbas raid was a story, a very expensive, very elaborately constructed story, and the IRGC had believed every word of it. What the IRGC had not been watching, could not have been watching because nothing about it was ever transmitted on any interceptable frequency, was a separate operation that had been planned in complete radio silence, briefed in person only, rehearsed on a site with no electronic devices within 2 kilometers. 22 operators, not the full assault force the IRGC had been preparing for. 22 men and 4 aircraft, moving toward a target that did not appear in any intelligence package the Iranians had ever seen, because that target was not a building, it was a ship. A single vessel anchored in the deep water channel 11 kilometers southeast of Keshem Island, a vessel that carried, according to 3 separate human intelligence sources whose identities had been protected at the cost of 2 years of careful cultivation, the complete encrypted communications architecture that the IRGC used to coordinate every anti-ship asset in the strait. Not the backup, not a relay, the primary system. The brain, The thing that, if it disappeared, would leave every missile battery on the northern shore functionally deaf and blind for a minimum of 72 hours. Long enough for the mine clearance destroyers to do their work. Long enough to change the entire strategic picture of the strait in a single night. 12:47 in the morning. The 4 MH-60Ms came off the deck of a vessel whose name and position will not appear in this account. They flew at wave-top altitude with their transponders off, running on terrain-following systems that kept them so low the pilots could see the whitecaps of individual waves through their night vision. No formation lights, no radio traffic, no emissions of any kind from any system that was not essential to keeping the aircraft in the air and moving in the right direction. The MC-130J that would normally orbit overhead and paint a complete electronic picture of the target area was not there tonight, because the electronic picture would have been visible to Iranian sensors, and tonight the whole point was to be invisible. The 4 aircraft flew in single file, separated by 400 meters, each pilot flying on instruments and instinct, and 12 years of flying in conditions that no civilian aviation authority on Earth would have certified as survivable. 41 minutes of absolute silence. And then the target materialized out of the dark water ahead, exactly where the satellite imagery and the human sources had said it would be. 12:58 in the morning, the first 2 Black Hawks flared and held a hover 6 meters off the water on the vessel's port side, while the operators fast-roped to the deck. Not a compound roof, not a desert target with perimeter fencing and guard rotations. A ship's deck in open water at night, rising and falling with the swell, the metal surface slick with salt spray, the operating aircraft fighting a 3-knot crosswind that required constant correction to hold position. The operators hit the deck and moved immediately, weapons up, clearing the external spaces before the second pair of aircraft had even begun their approach. The crew of the vessel, 12 men, none of them combatants in any military sense, all of them contractors running a system they understood technically but not strategically, were secured in under 90 seconds. No shots fired, no resistance, because the crew of that ship did not know what they were carrying. They thought they were running a commercial communications relay. They had been told exactly that by the people who hired them. The IRGC had used cutouts, shell companies, layers of deniability so deep that even the men maintaining the system did not know whose system it was. That was very smart. It was also why none of them resisted when the operators came through the bridge door. 1:06 in the morning. The technical exploitation team had 20 minutes. They used 19. What they pulled off those systems in 19 minutes, the encryption keys, the frequency maps, the authentication protocols, the complete architecture of how the IRGC coordinated every anti-ship asset from the northern shore, was worth more than any building that could have been destroyed, any radar array that could have been blown up, any command complex that could have been reduced to rubble. Because rubble can be rebuilt. An exploitative technical architecture this complex, this carefully constructed over years, once it is in the wrong hands, it cannot simply be replaced. You don't know what the other side knows. You don't know which frequencies are burned. You don't know which authentication protocols have been compromised. You have to tear it all down and rebuild from nothing. And that takes months. Months during which every missile battery on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz is operating partially blind, partially deaf, unable to fully trust the system it depends on to function. The technical team finished, wiped what they couldn't take, and set the rest to burn on a timer. Then they went back up the ropes. 1:09 in the morning. All 4 aircraft cleared the area at wave-top altitude, heading southwest, back toward the deck they had launched from. The entire operation from first rope to last aircraft clear had taken 22 minutes. At no point had any Iranian radar system detected anything unusual. At no point had any IRGC fast boat been scrambled. At no point had a single shot been fired in either direction. The vessel they had boarded was already transmitting a distress signal. The crew had been given satellite phones and the specific coordinates of the nearest Coast Guard station before the Americans left. No one was hurt, no one was left behind. The only thing that was gone was the system. And in the monitoring bunker 40 kilometers north, the IRGC commander, who had spent 4 months building the most sophisticated ambush of his career, was still watching the feed from the Bandar Abbas facility, waiting for the Blackhawks that were never going to come, when his communications officer told him that the primary coordination network had just gone completely silent. Not jammed, not interrupted, silent, as if it had simply ceased to exist. He looked at the feed, he looked at his communications officer, and in that moment, he understood exactly what had happened. They had never been watching the operation, they had been watching the curtain. And behind the curtain, in 22 minutes of dark water and cold silence, the real work was already done. The Strait of Hormuz went back to its breathing.